What's going on, everybody? Adam from South Harmon Fantasy Football, here to bring to you again another really exciting episode. Today, what I want to touch on are three players that I think right now are very attainable in June, and even as we get into July, are likely going to have buy windows open on these three guys because they're getting older, but these are guys that could absolutely be staples in your lineup and a part of your team if you do want to secure a title. And that buy window is going to be closing anywhere from August and certainly by September in your league. So I think it's important to talk about that right now. But before we get into all the details on these guys, let's go ahead and hit that intro. Now, the first player on this list of three that I'd like to talk with you about today currently is wide receiver 35 in Dynasty startups and is also wide receiver 33 on Keep Trade Cut. Coming off of another ho-hum season where he finished inside the top 10 and also had another year where he had a new starting quarterback at the helm. This guy's been playing for 10 seasons, and he's had 7 different starting quarterbacks over that time. And so while obviously over those 10 years, quarterback play has not been a consistent thing for him, a lot of the quarterbacks that he's played for over that time actually have been subpar. One thing that is consistent, though, for this player is every single year he's going to show up and give you at least 1,000 yards. And the fact that he's given you that type of consistent output year in and year out, and while he is 30 years old, certainly a little bit on the older side when it comes to Dynasty, I really don't think he should be pushed down quite this far. And if you take a look at historical data, if he shows up again and goes for over 1,000 yards in this season, he will now tie the GOAT, Jerry Rice, for 11 straight seasons in a row of over 1,000 yards. Jerry Rice is the only other receiver in the NFL history to have 10 years in a row with 1,000 receiving yards, and he has a chance to tie him this year. In NFL history, there's only been 3 receivers that have given you 1,000 yards receiving or more in their career, and that is Jerry Rice, Mike Evans, and Randy Moss. And basically, if you ask the question to anyone, who's the wide receiver GOAT, you're going to get one of Jerry Rice or Randy Moss, almost guaranteed. Mike Evans is on an extremely short list with those 2 receivers, and there's one thing that both Jerry Rice and Randy Moss cannot say, and that's every single season that they've suited up, they've gone for north of 1,000 yards. And with all that said, I understand Mike Evans is 30 years old, so because of his age, this is why he's pushed down this far when it comes to startups or just valuing players in general this time of year. But the fact that he's valued well outside the top 24 makes him, in my opinion, a screaming value this time of year and somebody that you should be targeting if you're trying to win a title. And with that type of consistency over his career, one thing we obviously can expect is for him to show up and give you over 1,000 receiving yards for the season. But what's really going to make him a league winner? It's simply touchdowns. If you take a look at Mike Evans in the 10 years that he's played, the only times that he's finished outside the top 15 at the receiver position, and there's been 3 of those seasons where he finished at wide receiver 17, 17, and wide receiver 22. Those seasons he was basically just unlucky in regards to touchdowns. In those 3 seasons of 3, 5, and 6 touchdowns, historically those are very low for Mike Evans because he's such a big body, a red zone threat, and even at this later part of his career, at 30 years old, somebody that can still take the top off of defenses and has huge upside as far as long touchdowns. Last year, he had 2 receptions of 70 yards or more, and he had a total of 5 receptions of 40 yards or more. So a guy that is this type of big body presence in the red zone, plus that type of long home run ability, this is a wide receiver that has huge touchdown upside, and in 5 of his 10 seasons has offered double-digit touchdowns. And one thing that is certain about Mike Evans, when he gives you double-digit touchdowns, this is a guy that finishes as a wide receiver 1 and has the ability to finish damn near as the wide receiver 1 overall. He has shown us a wide receiver 2 finish when he does have that big season of over 1,000 receiving yards, plus the fact that he's giving you double-digit touchdowns. And although the clock is ticking as far as how long he's going to be able to give you production, this is a guy that certainly I expect production from this season and very well could give you 2 to 3 more years of high-end wide receiver 1 upside at the position because he's so big and still is going to give that big presence in the red zone for a guy like Baker Mayfield. So at this price, this is a guy I'm absolutely interested in buying. If there's any way that I can basically purchase Mike Evans without having to send a liquid first, this is a guy that I'm trying to get on as many of my dynasty teams over the next 6 weeks until that redraft mindset really kicks in about August. Now, the second player on this list is wide receiver 39 in Dynasty Startups and wide receiver 44 on Keep Trade Cut. And I'll admit to you that I do have a little bit of a bias towards Amari Cooper because he's a Cleveland Brown. But when I take my bias out of it, and I just try to look at what we've seen historically from Amari Cooper and what we're likely to project this season and what his age is, currently 29, going to be 30 in the season this year. And with what we've seen from Amari Cooper over the last 2 years since he's been a Cleveland Brown, you look at 2 years ago when he had Jacoby Brissett for the majority of the year, and then at the back half of the season, he was playing with Deshaun Watson, who after a long period of not playing quarterback looked extremely rusty. Amari Cooper in that year was a top 10 finisher at the receiver position. And if you look at this year, very similar to Mike Evans when you talk about what went wrong this year and why he wasn't a top 10 finisher. He only had 5 touchdowns. But this year, with 5 different quarterbacks, the Browns had 5 different starting quarterbacks over the season. Deshaun Watson was the opening day starter. Obviously, they brought Joe Flacco out of retirement. And then they also had P.J. Walker, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and Jeff Driscoll under center. 5 starting quarterbacks was the most for any team of all last season. And the fact that he had that much inconsistency at the quarterback position, when you take a look at his game log overall and you look at who was the starter in those games, for the most part, the games that he really did not show up were when P.J. Walker or Dorian Thompson-Robinson was under center. It'd be really hard to project that he had more quarterback inconsistency and worse overall quarterback play than he did last year when he was wide receiver 20 on the season. This is a guy that if he gets much closer in touchdowns to what we saw 2 years ago in that 8, 9, 10 range like he was, this is a guy that absolutely could be a top 12 finisher at the receiver position again. And just simply because he's 29 and going to be 30, I don't think that type of age, given what we've seen from Amari Cooper and how he's played over the last 2 years, this is a guy that does not appear to be losing a step at all. I think this is a guy that absolutely offers you 1 or 2 years left of production and certainly could offer more than that. So Amari Cooper is the second person on this list and a guy that I also want to buy as much as possible before that buy window completely closes on a lot of these older veterans. Now, the third and final player on this list did just turn 32 this month, so certainly a little older, and at this point forward is probably to look at best as a 1-year bet, year in and year out, if he continues to produce. But even though he is 32 years old and getting extremely close to the dynasty cliff, I really don't think he should be pushed this far down the board. At wide receiver 58 in dynasty startups and wide receiver 62 on Keep Trade Cut, Nuke Hopkins has been absolutely nuked by the dynasty community, and this price is absolutely worth taking a shot on DeAndre Hopkins in my opinion. And if you take a look just at last season, he was wide receiver 22, but if you take a look at when Will Levis took over as the starter, essentially the week after the bye, so that was week 8 through 18, he was the wide receiver 6 in fantasy points scored over that time for the receiver position. And we saw with Will Levis at the helm, he had multiple weeks inside the top 10. And that was in last year's offense, which was towards the bottom of the NFL as far as pass attempts go. With Brian Callahan coming over from the Cincinnati Bengals offense, this is a guy that's going to entirely change the way things are run for the Tennessee Titans this year, philosophically, when it comes to the way that they're going to be passing the football and trying to do that at a much higher rate. And during the time that Brian Callahan and Zach Taylor were together, it was a team that did push the ball downfield quite a bit and typically was one of the highest pass attempt teams in the NFL over that time. With the offensive philosophy change that Brian Callahan is going to be bringing into this Titans organization, I think it's very safe to say that this team should be passing the ball much closer to 550 to 600 times a game. And if you take a look at what they did last year, that could very well give you more than 100 extra pass attempts in this season, and the offensive tempo should be a lot higher. So for Nuke Hopkins, the fact that Calvin Ridley was just given this big bag, and with him being so old and people seemingly writing him off, I think there's a very realistic chance, though, that Calvin Ridley on one side of DeAndre Hopkins on the other, I don't think that DeAndre Hopkins should be getting anywhere near the type of attention that he got last year from defenses, and is a guy that has very good route running ability and still is going to get open. I think he's going to have a much more efficient season this year, and with the volume going up, I think that the target number that he had last year in that 137 range is absolutely realistic to still stay there even with Calvin Ridley coming over. And if the rapport that Will Levis and DeAndre Hopkins were able to establish in the back half of the season is here to stay, this is a guy that last year finished as a wide receiver 2 and realistically could get very close to that top 15 range at the receiver position if was able to stay healthy. This is a guy that we're writing off, and if he doesn't pan out for you, that's kind of what you're expected given the fact that he's going in the 13th round of dynasty startups, and that's basically what you're paying for. He's going in the range of guys like Jahan Dotson, Jerry Jeudy, Roman Wilson, Quentin Johnson, Jermaine Burton, Khalil Shakir, and Gabe Davis. None of these guys really offer much of a ceiling or anywhere near the upside that DeAndre Hopkins does currently. Certainly you shouldn't be looking at him as more than a 1-year bet. But if I am going to be betting on 1 season of production, DeAndre Hopkins, I believe, as a talent still offers that, and at this price is too much for me to pass up. DeAndre Hopkins is already somebody that I have on a fair amount of my teams, and I am still looking to cheaply purchase him in a couple spots. That's all I got for you today. A quick hitter talking about 3 players that I think it's really important to discuss in Dynasty right now, especially this point in the summer when everyone still typically is looking to reset the age on their Dynasty teams, and sometimes going the other way where you're acquiring an older player at this point of the season, guys like Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, and DeAndre Hopkins, which a lot of people think are getting close to that age apex. Acquiring those type of guys can pay off for you extremely quickly as early as September of this year. So those are 3 guys that I think it's important for you to go check out and see if you can buy over the next 6 weeks before we get to August. That's all I got. I'll see you back here, same time, same place next week. I'm out of here. Peace.